Wait, that many people did.
So it looks like most didn't finish. And then a few more almost finished, only 3 finished, and 2 have stretched, finished and stretched. Okay. Well, you guys are in luck because this is going to be a solution lecture. Only for part 6, though, so you still have to do part 7, but we'll go over part 6. And my understanding is that Brady went over some of it yesterday, but we're going to just kind of start from the beginning and show you a full solution or just one way to approach this. And, there are any number of ways to do this, but we'll just show you one possibility. So I'll share my screen and then we can get started. Did previous cohorts struggle as much as we are during this week? It's hard not to feel like I'm just too dumb to get it. No, other cohorts definitely struggled. This is a very hard week, along with algorithms and data structures. This week is also very hard. Really, all the CS is very tough. So, definitely don't feel like you did a bad job because you didn't finish or you're struggling, because it's hard for all of us. So that's definitely not a concern. So I'm just going to share my screen. And I apologize, this takes me a while. I have one small laptop to work with. I don't have any big fancy monitors, unfortunately, but hopefully you guys will be able to see everything okay. I'll leave that there. Can you guys see my screen okay? You see the code screen? You can just post a message in Slack if you can see this. Looks good. Yes, yes. Nice. Then we have another comment in Poly that says, I got my approach planned, but couldn't figure out how to translate it into working code. Okay, maybe we can talk about that too today. I'll just show you guys the solution that we have, the Lambda solution. But like I said, there's any number of better solutions. Okay, I guess we're good to get started. So just as a reminder, part 6 was just to write an algorithm that will let you create any number of random adventure rooms. Basically, if you start with one room, you want to be able to add additional rooms to that one room. So if we recall sorry, this thing's in my way. Just a second. If we recall the adventure, the mud game that we made a couple weeks ago, we had all these rooms that we connected. Where are they? We had all these rooms that we connected, the foyer, outside overlook, and we connected them using this connect rooms function that we created in our room file when we had the mud game. So connect rooms, and basically we have a room class, and you have 4 directions: north 2, south 2, east 2, west 2. They're all set to none. And when you call the connect rooms function, you basically just make it so that one of those directions has another room attached to it. So basically you have a connecting room, so another room object, and you set whichever attribute to that new room, this connecting room, as we have here. And of course, we could traverse it when we played the game before, and hoping that you all remember that from a couple weeks ago. Now, as far as being able to add a random number of rooms and adding as many rooms as you want, it's all going to come down to at the basic level. one method, which is generate rooms, which we saw yesterday in the repo, but we are going to need several helper methods and a couple other pieces added to our room class, and then this world class that we're going to build out. So first of all, for the rooms, we're going to add one more attribute to the room, which is a coordinate. So we'll call it self.xy equal to 0, 0 by default. We have a list, and that's going to be our default, but it will get changed as we build out the rooms. And the reason that we want a coordinate is so we can say where each room is in a coordinate plane, and say if you have a room in a certain spot, that spot's occupied, so you can't create a room there, but you can create a room to the right, to the left, above it, or below it. So once you have that, we're going to come to world.py, and we're going to add a few more attributes to our world class. So we have the starting room, we have the rooms dictionary, where we're going to add a bunch of actual room classes. And then we want to also add in a empty set. We're going to call it self.occupied. And the point of this is to keep track of which spots in our coordinate grid have occupied a room. So there's a room there. Basically, you want to say you can't put a new room in this spot because there's already a room occupying that spot. So that's what we mean by occupied. So that new attribute for world and then the coordinate attribute for room are what we're going to basically need to create our new map, or randomly generated map. So we're going to come down to this code that you guys had yesterday, generate rooms, and we're going to just fill this out basically. So once again, we set the rooms attribute of world back to an empty dictionary in case it had been filled from the last time you called this method. And then we have this condition, which is already filled in again. If you put in for numberings that you want less than one room, then it doesn't work because you need at least one room to have a map to play the game. And once we fulfill that condition, we have another condition to worry about, which is the case where we have only one room. Before that though, let me just set a few more reset variables. So we want to first of all have the XY, which is going to be the coordinates of the first room, the room that we start with, and any room that we are working with at any given time. And when I say working room, what I basically mean is the whole point of this method is to say you have a room, and then you're going to choose a direction and then attach another room to it. So if we look at this little diagram I made, you're always going to start with at least one room, and we'll make sure of that too programmatically. But basically, this is going to be your working room. This is going to be the room that XY refers to here. And you're going to say, I have this room at 0, 0, and I have 4 choices: north, south, east, west for the directions. And I'm going to choose a direction at random, and then attach another room to that first room. And we're going to do that over and over again. Then we're going to say, this is our new working room. And we're going to choose a direction at random. Let's say we chose east, and we're going to attach a room to that. And this will be our new working room, and so on until we get through the complete number of rooms. And also, each of these is going to have a coordinate to it. So let's say we started at 0, 0 with the first room. And then if we go up in the Y direction, that's going to make this 0, 1. And if we go right in the X direction, after having gone up in the Y direction, this is going to be 1, 1. So I think we all got that, hopefully from yesterday, but just wanted to refresh that as I go through this. And so we have this for the coordinates of whatever room we're working with. Of course, in the first place, the room is going to be the starting room. So after we put those coordinates in, we also want to set our occupied set that we created above in our attributes. We want to set that back to an empty set. Again, this is just a restart thing in case we had already run generate rooms before. So same as on this line. And then we want to create another set called valid rooms. It's another empty set. And the purpose of this is to hold the indices or indexes, if you prefer, of valid rooms. And a valid room is a room where you can attach another room to it. So by default, the first room that we have is always going to be valid, of course, because it's only one room. But once you start to add rooms, if this room had 4 rooms connected to it, then it would no longer be a valid room. But one of the 4 rooms connected to it would be valid. So now that we have that valid rooms empty set, now we can get into our for loop. And now we can start to create some rooms. So we need to get rid of this hard-coded stuff. This was what you were supposed to replace yesterday. And I'm going to just comment that out. And we're going to start by adding a new room. So we're going to have the variable new room, and it's going to be equal to the room class that we created. And so we can keep track of it and know what we're working with. We're going to remember that the room class has a name and a description. Those are the 2 main variables that you have to fill in when you make this class. So we're going to name the room class room I, where I is the index that we're getting from the for loop here. And I'm sorry, I see that Andrew Liao has a comment or a question. What is self.occupied for again? Self.occupied is to keep track of the coordinates of spaces in the grid that have already been filled by a room. So that'll make more sense when we start to add a room. So basically that's just so we can say, hey, this spot has a room in it at this coordinate, so you can't put a new room there, basically. So this is going to be our name for the room then, room I, and then we'll just add a description here. You are standing in an empty room. And I think I'm going to actually say you are standing in an empty room with index I, so that we know from the title and from the description what room we're referring to. And of course, we'll do another F string here so that we can keep track of that. So we have the room, and this is going to be the room that eventually we will connect another room to. So no, this is the room that we're going to connect to whatever room we started with. So we start with our starting room, which you can see is defined on this line here. And we're going to eventually connect this room to the starting room. So this new room is the room that we want to connect. And so we have this new room variable, and then we're going to say that self.rooms I is equal to our new room so that it's added to our dictionary. Now, let me check one thing because I'm seeing there's going to be a collision here if starting room is room 0 and we start at 0 with our range. Let me just check one thing to make sure that we don't have any errors. So I think that we can leave this for now. We may have to change the range here so that it starts with 1 instead of 0, but I think it'll be fine because either way, we still have to create that first room. So except for in the case that we're creating the first room, this new room is going to refer to the next room that we're connecting to. But we're going to see here we have a special case for when the new room is the first room. So once we have that that new room created or instantiated, we're going to set up that case that we just talked about. So yes, here we are. So if I equals 0 in our loop, and actually I just noticed that this isn't indented properly. If I equals 0 in this loop, we're going to say that, or we're going to add the index of this first room to our valid rooms dictionary or our set rather that we created here. And then we're going to add the coordinates for this room to our self.occupied set that we created. And so now you can see sort of the point of self.occupied. And again, basically this, so if it's the first room for index 0, it's going to be the starting room that we have down here. And that's going to always start at 0, 0. Just, it doesn't have to start at 0, 0, but, it makes sense generally to start at 0, 0 when you're working with a grid. So being that that's a starting room, it's always going to be valid. It's always going to be valid every time. Remember, this valid room set holds the sets that we can holds the rooms that we can connect to, the indices of the rooms that we can connect to. And of course, like I said, if it's a starting room, it can always be connected to, obviously. And so once we have that self.occupied added, we can, so we have a question from Andrew. Why are we using string XY instead of just XY and adding it to occupied? That's a good question, Andrew. I don't think it's 100% necessary to cast it to a string, but we just choose to do it here just to make it easy to access and to utilize, because when it's being utilized in this form, it just needs to be, a string as opposed to a list where you need to access each element in the list. But we are going to cast it to a list later for a helper function. But right now it's fine for it to be a string. But I'm not 100% sure why it's specifically a string, but it's going to be easier for us now, will be the short answer. Marshall, I had that issue with the homework. I think it was for me because I was adding a list to a set gives an error. Yeah, okay, that's probably the exact reason then. Thank you for that, Marshall. So yeah, so you need it to be a string then to add it to the set, but we're gonna need it eventually to be a list, but we'll see that in a second here. So you have two cases then basically. If it's the first room, then you just add its index to the valid rooms set, and you just add the coordinates to our occupied set. But if it's any other room, then we're going to start to do that pattern that we talked about where, we have one working room and then we connect a new room to it. in, you know, one direction or another. You guys probably can't really see this, but yeah, one of these spots will have the new room, basically. So then let's talk about our else statement when it's any room except for the starting room. In the first place, we have to pick a direction because, again, every time we're saying we have this room, we want to pick a direction at random and then attach a room in that random direction that we picked. So let's create a random direction variable. It's called random dir. Before we set a direction, the variable isn't equal to anything. So we're just kind of creating it now, and then we're going to set it eventually. It is important that it's specifically set to none. You don't want to just set it when you decided on a direction, because by keeping it set to none, you're going to keep track of when you have a valid direction. Because sometimes you'll have a room and you'll say, well, I want to add a new room to this room, but it won't have any valid directions. It'll be, you know, closed off, and you have to choose a different room to add a new room to. Hopefully that makes sense. Marshall had a few more comments. I made it a tuple because adding a tuple to a set gives no error. Okay, well, yeah, that's another option then, Marshall. String or a tuple, either one should work fine. So once we have that random dir variable, we're going to create a while loop so that we can kind of look through the valid room indices that we have in the set here and see, you know, which room we could possibly attach to. And there's going to be different options. It's a set, so it's going to be filled up with multiple options. So, you know, you might get a room that's, I think Brady said this yesterday, actually, you might get a room that's potentially valid, but if that's not actually valid, if you try to, you know, add a random direction to it and you can't actually add a random direction to set this variable in another sense, then you're going to have to go to a different room in that valid room's indices set. And we're going to use a while loop to basically, let me just write this. We're going to use a while loop basically to keep going through that until we find the one that we need. So while random dir is none, while random dir is not selected in another sense. And now I want to create this variable valid room ID. I hope this isn't going to be confusing. If it is, we can always change it, but it's going to be equal to valid rooms dot pop. And so what is that saying then? Basically, you have this valid rooms set, which is a set of indices of rooms that can be connected to. And you're going to just get the ID from that when you pop it from valid rooms. So I hope that's clear to everybody. We have valid rooms and valid room ID. That could be valid versus valid rooms, Tom Tarpey suggests. Oh, you got it. Oh, yeah. Sorry, I was just. I have a habit of trying to explain things as I'm writing the code. I don't know if it's better to explain first then write, or write then explain, but just trying to make it work. So so you have that, and then you have that ID. So let me write a comment for that. To and from here is always important. So to which we can add a new room. So once we have that, we're going to get the XY of this room that we're connecting to. So we want that coordinate then. So self.xy xy equals self.rooms valid room ID dot xy. So make sure I got the whole line. So yeah, recall that when we modified our rooms class earlier, we created this attribute xy for the coordinates for each. Don't know what that was, but all right. So once you set that for X, Y, we're going to basically need this to add the room to our occupied set that we created, so that we can keep track of this room that's being created, and then also we're going to use it to set the coordinates for the new room that we add. So, but this is just for the room that we're going to add to, like I said here. So once we set this, we can start to try to set the random dir variable. Let me just write another comment here just so we're clear. So is it clear to everybody what I mean when I say that we have this room and we're going to connect to a new room, and then here I have we can add a new room to this room. This is saying the same things, but I said to here and from here. But is this clear to everybody that we're talking about the same room and the coordinates of this room? Okay, good. So once we have those coordinates, we can then try to set our random dir variable to a value. So how we do that is we're going to create a function called self.get random direction, and it's going to take in two parameters. It's going to take in a room, so self.rooms valid room ID, and it's going to take in a coordinate value for that given room, which we have here. So these two variables basically. So we're going to have to create that function then so that you can see how it returns the direction that we need. And remember, there's going to be a few helper functions in here, so it's going to get a bit complicated. But remember, basically, we're just trying to get, one of those four directions that we all remember from a couple weeks ago: north, south, east, west. So one of those four strings basically is what we're going to eventually return in this random dir variable. But first, so let's make that method that we talked about, self.get random direction. So we're going to come back up here, and we're going to make it just above this generate rooms function that we have. And as I said, let me just check my notes. As I said, it's going to have the room as a parameter. It's going to have self as a parameter, of course, and then the room, and then the coordinates, which we'll just abbreviate to coords. And then, so we'll set that. And then for this method, what it basically is going to do is take in it's going to use a list, and it's going to eventually be populated with some combination of the possible cardinal directions of north, south, east, west. It may have all of them. It may just have some of them. You'll see in a second how that works. But basically, it's going to be empty to start with. And then you're going to have conditionals. It may or may not have these directions. So what does that mean? It means if statements, conditionals. So we're going to have an if statement that basically checks the coordinates of the room that we're working with. So again, if you start it in this room that we're working with, our working room, the room that we got from valid room ID, this is when you're going to check if you can attach a room in any given direction. So we're going to need another helper function, but I'm just going to define it, or I'm just going to write it first here. It's check coordinates. And did I spell that right? Yeah, and it takes in the coords from here, and then it takes in a possible direction. So this is basically saying if there's nothing, if there's a valid spot to the north, there's no room occupying the coordinate to the north. So +1 in the y direction, basically. If that's the case, then you can add, you can append the north direction to your dir's list. And we'll say, so follow that pattern then, basically, with this function that we're going to define in a second here, you're going to put in the coordinates of your room and say the direction is east. And this is basically going to say if there's nothing in the east direction that we can, if there's no room in the east direction, then we can append a room here, possibly. And that's going to be really important. We can possibly append a room here. And you'll see in a second why I say possibly. And we'll do the same thing with check coordinates for west. And we'll append west here. Is that capital? And then we'll do it for east. And I do believe you can just do, I'll not take it back. I think that I have something written down where I have a bunch of ifs, but it really should be elifs, but that's a small thing. It's not necessarily going to be an issue for anything, but just like to be precise when I can. But basically, I think this will be easier to see once I add this check coordinates function. So I think I'll just do that now. But just remember, we have this dir's list, and we're trying to add in potential directions to select from. And I'm going to show you the check coordinates function so that you can get a better idea of what's going on here. So 2 of my arguments are cores instead of coordinates. Thank you, Tom. So with check coordinates, the way this function works, it takes in the coordinates that we passed in here. So the coordinates of the room that we're trying to attach another room to. And then it also takes in a direction, one of the 4 cardinal directions that we inserted here as arguments. So it takes those in. And what it does basically, this is the funny part here. So this actually calls another function called update coordinates, which again sounds like a lot. Definitely want to use your working memory here, but we're going to make it very clear in a second and how these all add up. But basically, this part is simple in that it just returns a string for this other function we're going to create, update coordinates. And I apologize that we're just trying to follow a chain of functions here, but it'll make sense. So this function update coordinates, which takes in the same variables, same parameters, coords and directions. And we want to say this function that we're defining right now, we want the string version of this function's return statement, not in the self.occupied set that we had. Again, a little confusing, but let's just get the next function out, and then we'll just, 1, 2, 3, show how these all connect together. So now we need to create the update coordinates function, and we will define it here. Another private function, so it has that underscore there. And this function takes in coords and direction, just as the check coordinates function does. We get some spaces in here so that we can read this code a little bit easier. And what this function does, first of all, it takes we define a variable new coordinates and new chords, and it's going to be equal to the coordinates that we passed in. We're going to cast it to a list, and I think it already is a list, as you'll recall from the room attribute. But we're just going to make sure it's a list because super important here. There's going to be a list, and you'll see why in a second. So this function is nice and easy. It's update coordinates. It takes in coordinates and a direction and updates the passed in coordinates based on that direction. So that part's pretty simple. And, this function is going to be used here. It also has another use later in our code. So let's just show how that works. So once we have those coordinates cast to a list, which they already were, but, just to be sure, we're going to have a few if statements in here. And we're going to basically, just as the function says, update those coordinates. So based on the direction. So if the direction is north, for example, then you're going to update the y value of the coordinates. Remember, the coordinates had a x value, which is this first element, and a y value, which is the second element for any given room. So here you're updating the y as you say the direction I want to move in is north, or connect the room in is north. So that's one up. I'm probably over explaining, but just so we're clear. So you're going to take this new chords list and the second element, which is the y value, and you're going to do plus equals 1. So that if you were to say start at 0, 0 with the first room, the next room is going to be at 0, 1, right? I hope that's pretty straightforward. And then we're going to do the same thing, same basic pattern. So let's say we were doing south next. If that was the direction, we need to update the coordinates again. Just to make sure you guys are still awake, what will we put in to finish this line to update the coordinates? Write an answer in Slack. Yep, minus equals 1. And, but so what's the first part, though, for the coordinates, new coordinates? Remember the list part? I just filled in the list. I didn't select the element. Yep, perfect. Yeah, it's actually 1, Akshay, but that's a good guess all the same. So yeah, minus equals 1. And then I think you guys can feel a pattern coming. So if it's east, which is to the right, what do we do there with new coordinates? Yep, it's exactly right, Michelle. Good job. New coordinate 0 plus equals 1. And then finally, this is a gimme. The direction is west. So obviously new coordinates 0 minus equals 1 to indicate that you're moving to the left. So you update the coordinates that you put in based on which direction you want to move in. And once you have that updated coordinates, you got to return them. So you just finally return new coordinates. And so hopefully now we can see we return coordinates here in this update coordinates function. So when you do check coordinates, which is down here, what you're doing is you're making sure that these updated coordinates, which are going to be the coordinates to the next room, the room that you're connecting to the current room, you want to make sure that's not already in self.occupied. So that's why we're checking the return value of update coordinates to make sure it's not in self.occupied for check coordinates. And then what that does is it says, if once you check those coordinates, once you've checked that, you have a certain room that you're working with, and if, let's say, the room to the north, right above it, you check to make sure that those coordinates are not in self.occupied. That's what check coordinates is doing here. So you update the coordinates that you were starting with, which is the coordinates for the room that you're working in. And when you update them, you make sure that updated value is not in self.occupied. And if it's not in there, then you can add north to your DIRS function as a potential direction to choose. I got a few questions here. Why for N and S new chords 1 and E and W for new chord 0? That's a good question, Linda. Basically, just because when you have the coordinates, which are attribute on this room object, they're a XY coordinate pair. And you know, the 0th element is going to be our X, and the the 1 element is going to be our Y. And the way that we have this set up, we say that in our coordinate plane, we say that if we have 0, 0 is the origin or the middle here, we want to think of it like a compass. So north is above, south is below, east is to the right, and west is to the left. So remembering that the Y value was the first element. Oops, this is hard to do. So remembering that, oh shoot, that deleted what I wanted to write. But remembering that Y is the second element. You know, if you go north, oh my picture's gone, but you can imagine if you go north, then you're going to increase Y by 1. If you go south, you're going to decrease Y by 1, which corresponds to the first element here, or the 1 element here, second element in our coordinate pair. And if you're going to the right, that would be east. And if you're going to the left, that would be west. And that would increase or decrease the pair by 1, basically. The X coordinate, the 0th element by 1 in that coordinate pair. Does that make sense, Linda? The drawing got a little messed up, but does that kind of make sense? Okay, perfect, great. And then Tom, nice clamping method. Thank you. So now we have the option to possibly add all these directions to north. And again, we're gonna add as many as are valid in the thing, because you know, remember we checked to see we have one room that we're working with, and then we say, you know, which adjacent spaces are available to the north, the south, the east, and the west, which coordinates are available in that case. And those potentials, you know, north, south, east, west, are going to get put into this directions array. And we're going to choose one of the directions from this directions list, at random. So we're going to basically come down here, and we're going to, let me check my notes just to make sure I don't mess this up. We're going to call random.shuffle. So random.shuffle on the DIRS list to take, whatever elements are in here. Let's just say it had north, south, and west only. And it's just going to shuffle the order of these elements, basically. And I know these should be in quotes, but just for the sake of simplicity and explanation, I'm leaving them out of quotes, but that would be wrong, generally speaking. So this is going to shuffle the order of the elements, and then we're just going to return the first element. So we got to be careful, though. We're not just going to return if the length of DIRS is greater than 0. So if there is a valid, So if there is a valid direction, then we're going to return DIRS 0. And it doesn't matter, you know, we said return DIRS 0. That's probably the safest option just in case. And like I said, you could have all 4 directions here. You may only have one valid direction that you can go in. So you might just have one direction choice in here, in which case you would have to pick the 0th option. So you definitely want to pick 0. But if you had all 4, you could technically pick, you know, what's a number between 0 and 3. But we're just going to shuffle and pick the first element in that shuffle. And if we're going to do shuffle, we need to import the random module. So let me just import that, and then I see Michelle has a question. I'll look at it in just a second here. So that's that, and then just one more thing, then I'll get to your question, Michelle. If we don't have that condition, so if there were no directions in the directions list, that we just return none, basically. So Michelle had a question. So the check coordinates checks if the adjacent room is unoccupied, right? Yes, that's exactly right, Michelle. And so now we have that. So now, all that to say, there's a few more questions coming in, but all that to say, that's how we get the random direction that we are going to put in here in the self-that-get random direction. It's a long time ago, huh? Hopefully you guys remember that. So, we start off with a random direction, undefined or none, or not selected yet, not chosen yet. And then, while it's none, we want to find a room that can be connected to, so that has, one of those directions you can connect in with the coordinate plane. And then we get the coordinates of that room, and then we find the random direction by calling random direction. We pass in the room, and then we pass in the coordinates, and then we do all that checking that we did. All, again, basically to say, is there a room adjacent to this room to north, south, east, west, top, left, bottom, right that we can connect to? And we're checking that with the coordinates that we pass in. So that was a mouthful, but that's that. Michelle, could we just add to get random direction function to check if the room is empty and the adjacent room is unoccupied? You mean instead of doing it in the check coordinates and the update coordinates function, Michelle? Is that what you mean? Instead of doing it this way? Yeah, that's what that does. So yeah, you could have technically put it all in one function, but generally for the sake of readability, even though you got to kind of use your working memory more to, say, oh, this function calls this function calls this function. This is generally more readable. That's fine. That's fine. It's a good question. All right. So what's happening here? Why is this written like this? If length 0, return dir 0. Why is this up here? Something weird happened with my code. Just want to make sure that I don't have any errors here. That is very strange. Sorry, let me just make sure that I have this where it's supposed to be. Did anybody see me type something weird that this got way up here? You have destination and destinations. Cut the depth generate rooms and the self rooms underline 71. Oh, you're saying cut and paste them underline 71? Oh, it got moved up. Okay, thank you, Jonathan. Yeah, I don't know how that happened, but let me just put that back where it was. And then self-dot rooms. That's really strange. So hopefully I didn't ruin my code, but it looks like that's how it was before. So we'll just debug it if we have any issues later. But did we get all the questions? Oh, Michelle said I have destination and destinations. I'm not sure what you mean by that, Michelle. Directions. I have. Do I have error? Oh, I see. Thank you. Very good catch. Doesn't need to be. No, yeah, just direction. All right, thank you. Perfect, Michelle. Okay, so once we've set that random direction, going through all those different steps, we want to next line 56 has a W left over in the brackets. Why are there so many random errors in here? Oh, okay, that's from my little example earlier. Thanks. You guys are really good at catching these errors. This is like the best way to code. Just have 40 people looking at your code to make sure you don't make any mistakes. I love it. All right. So we have this random direction that we filled in to this variable, which means that this is gonna break because now random direction is not gonna be none anymore. So once that breaks, we're going to come out of the while loop and let me just check one thing. Oh, so first we're gonna look at the case when the random dir is not none. So if the random dir is not none, which obviously it is once we set it, but not not at first. You may run this function and it may still be none because you might return nothing from your random direction function. That was the point of this line that we had here. So, if it's not none, then we're going to add to the valid rooms set, and we're going to specifically add valid room ID. So we're going to add this back in to the valid room set, the room that we were working with before. Excuse me. And that's basically just to say that, this room. Well, after we found the room we wanted and we connected, and we have a direction that we want to use. Let's say that we were here and then we connected here. This room is still valid. You can still connect here or to the left here. And so you're basically just adding that back in to say this room's still valid. So just add it in because we popped it out before. So we got to add it back in now. And after we add it back in, then we can come out of our function. Out of our while loop rather. And we can take the steps that we need to actually connect the room. Because before, we're working with one room. We said we want to find a random direction, based off this room to connect a new room to. Now we have that random direction. Now we want to connect a new room. So we're going to say, first of all, we're going to set XY equal to self.update coordinates, with the XY of the working room, the same room that we've been working with all this time, the room that we're going to connect to. The room that we're connecting from, So, in this first case, it's the first room. So the room that we're working with valid room ID, the room that we set the coordinates of here, that's now getting updated here when we do update coordinates. So that this XY here corresponds to this XY here, but is now, of course, being updated with this variable here. Hopefully that was clear. And then, so for update coordinates, we need that, and then we need a direction. So we're going to pass in, I should have let you guys guess, but the random direction variable that we got from self.get random direction. And so we have that XY set, and then we do, let me just look at my notes, self.rooms. Yes, so now finally we get to actually connect the room. This is the actual connect the room part. So we do self.rooms, valid room ID. Remember, that was the room that we were working with before, the room that we're going to connect from. We start with this room, and then we connect another room to it. So that room. So for that room, we're going to call the connect rooms function. I'm sure you guys remember this function that we defined here that we used a couple weeks ago to connect the different rooms together. So we're just redoing that same thing that we already did. And with this, what we're gonna put in is for our arguments is the direction that we want, the random direction that we return from our get random direction function, and then the room that we want to connect. So that's the new room that we defined up here. way back when, like 20 minutes ago. So that's finally getting used again here. And, once we add that new room, we updated the coordinates, to correspond to this new room that we just connected or added. So now we got to add those coordinates to the occupied set because, well, it's occupied now. So you want to keep track of that, basically. And once you add that, you then want to update XY, the one that's gonna be where is it? Oh yeah, the one that's gonna be here when we start our for loop. I think I have this too high. I'll come back in a second. But we have to update XY, so we'll set new room.xy equal to XY, which we updated here, of course. And then finally, we're gonna add in this room that we just created to the valid room set because, if we just created it, again, most likely, not necessarily, but most likely it's going to be a valid room. So, I mean, you have one room here and then you create this new room. Clearly, it has options to the north, to the east, and to the south. So once we do that, let me see. We might be just about done here. Just need to double check something. I think we can actually run this and see if it works. I'm a little, something's not adding up. For new room.xy equals xy. Well, that makes sense, but okay, no, I'm sorry. I must have misspoke earlier. So we're just setting the xy attribute for this new room to the xy that we updated here with the update coordinates function. So sorry about that. Must have misspoke earlier. So I think at this point we may be able to run the function. So let's try it out and see. We are in adv.py, and then if we do Python 3, adv.py, will that run? Oh, save. That is a great point, Michelle. Yes, save first. Yeah, let's see. Yeah, I have this this little zoom bar that you guys probably all know and hate above my screen, so I can't see anything at the top of the screen. But yeah, so save first. Now that we saved, let's see if this is working. So what is your name? My name is Alec. And so remember in the first example of this, which we hopefully I just commented out instead of deleting. We yeah, so we had one room basically, and we just connected one room to the north of that room. So if we can traverse this map by doing more than just choosing north, then this will have worked. So let's just see, and we can do some tests to see if it did work. So so we went north to that first room. So did it work? Let's see. Can't move in that direction. West. Yes, you're room 2. You're now standing in empty room with index 2. So that means it worked. I can't move in that direction. I'm going to go east, north, room 3. You are in empty room 3. So you can see that it worked then, because before we only had 2 rooms. Now we have at least 3, but no, we have at least 100 actually, or exactly 100, I should say. Yeah, room 4, room 5, room 6. Can't move in that direction. Room 7. So basically it worked. That's all it is for that basic thing. A lot of steps here, a little bit of, remembering things and connecting this to that to this. Well, that's the basic function. And then Brady left us with this little print map to look at, which, it's just a printout. It doesn't actually map. It's not like you can look at this and say, oh, I can move through the grid based on this printout, but it's nice just to give a visualization of the of this world, or like a potential visualization. It's not actually accurate. So we have this print map here, and we had to connect it up to our ADV file just to get it working. So let's give that a try. So we'll do in here, we'll do elif commands 0 is equal to PM, which is going to be print map, which I haven't inserted just yet. No, I take it back. I'm going to insert it here. So we'll do world dot print map, and I think that will enable us to try this out. So if we run ADV again, name is Alec. Just make sure it still works. Room 33. I wonder what that map looks like. Again, this isn't actually accurate mapping, but it shows us what a room might potentially look like. And what's interesting about this map that Brady made for us is that it shows us a starting spot, and then, you know, all these zeros are other rooms that are occupied. So if you were to say this was 0, 0 in a coordinate plane, and then you have, yes, PM is print map, Linda, just that function that we were just looking at in world.py, this method, I should say. And yeah, it's just imported into adv.py right here. So you start here, and you can say, okay, if we go north to this room, it's occupied at coordinate 0, 1. If we go west, that's occupied at coordinate -1, 0. This is east, occupied at 1, 0, so on and so forth. So that's basically part 6, the MVP for part 6. Like I said, there are any number of ways that you can do this, but that's just one example. And at this point, I'm curious to know if anybody else had any other implementations or other ways that they went about this project. Oh, you know what? I just realized before we get to that, you guys should take a break. We've been here for a long time now. We're gonna have a 5-minute break, and then we'll come back. And if anybody wants to show the things that they did, they can do that. So we'll do a 5-minute timer. As soon as this computer loads. It's a very old MacBook Pro. This computer is 6 years old, almost 7. But it does what it needs to do most of the time. So okay, I'll just let you guys go. This will come up eventually, and I'll just post a message in Slack when we're back. So take a break. This will come. Here we go. This will start soon, and you guys can just come back in 5. Okay. I hope everybody is back. Let's see what Marshall had to say. I had an issue with my homework where I would have rooms around that just didn't connect to anything. So I did this to make sure I don't have rooms that don't connect to anything. Oh, okay, gotcha. While tuple new chords in occupied. Get random equals random direction rooms I minus one. New chords equals get chords. New chords equals get chords. Get random coordinates. Okay, interesting. So that worked for you, Marshall, doing that using that code. You were able to get the rooms to connect properly.
Am I allowed to talk? I didn't want to type anymore.
Yeah, sure, that's fine.
Oh, well, I would, I went through and I made like an ID for each room, and then I would add like the ID of the rooms that the other rooms connected to.
Mm.
And then every now and then when I'd run my thing, I'd realize that if there was like an issue with like, oh, you can't connect here because of the coordinates taken,
Mm-hmm.
then what it would do is it just would make a room, but then the room wouldn't connect to anything.
Oh, okay.
So then I would, it would be like going through it, the map,
Mm-hmm.
and then like you'd hit room like this room, and then you couldn't get to the room past it because there would be a room which has no connections.
Mm.
So then when I did there is I would like if it wants to make a room, but then it says, oh, it can't do it because there's already a room there, then it just keeps doing it over and over again until it finally finds something else that it can connect to. So that way I don't ever get like random rooms that just won't connect to anything.
That sounds
It doesn't happen every time. It's just whether or not the little snake is going to like cross over on itself on the X and Y coordinates.
right. Sounds good. Yeah, and I don't know if that was made clear to you guys here with what I just showed, but the way that this code, let me put this back down now. The way that this code prevents what Marshall just said is that was basically with this valid room set. Hopefully, it was clear, and that you add any number of valid rooms. You pop one out just to say, okay, this room's valid. I'm going to attach a new room to it. But then remember, you add it back in after that, and you'll do that for every room in the for loop that has a valid connection. So if it finds one, if it finds, remember that's the point of the while loop. Remember that's the point of the while loop. If it tries to use a room and it tries to set it to random dir, but it doesn't set it and it's none, the random dir is still none, and then the method, or the while loop rather, is just going to go through to the next valid room in the set and just pop that off and try it with that room. It just keep doing that. And, of course, because it popped it in the first place, it adds it if the room is valid, but the room is invalid, then it pops it and it's just gone. So you don't have to worry about adding in invalid rooms again with this because you're looping. So um, Andrew, my implementation used a dictionary of dictionaries. Interesting. To store rooms in a grid. I also use a stack to keep a history of rooms created in case the room was room has no valid connections and I need to try another room. Interesting. Do you want to post your code to the Slack channel, Andrew? Maybe we can take a look at it.
Like the entire world thing?
Or just, I guess, whatever method that you where you use these dictionaries, and I mean, if it's a ton of code, you don't have to, but
yeah, I mean, yeah, it's the entire file because you're asking how we implemented it, so
okay,
I'm just sharing how I use a different implementation. Yeah,
okay.
I can copy and paste it though.
I mean, yeah, if it's like a short thing, or like it's not too long, if it's not like hundreds of lines, then yeah, I can go ahead and paste it. Anybody else want to talk about their code before we wrap up here? We're just going to go over what you need to do for today, which is just complete part 7, and then start preparing for your sprint tomorrow, which we have a preview of here, but we're not going to get too deep into. Is the sprint different? There's no bokeh. It's a good question, Marshall. I don't know. I haven't looked at it that closely yet, but I mean, really, I just got this from the Lamb School repo, so I'm not sure. I would definitely wait and to see, that you guys get an update tomorrow, but I'm not sure. I mean, either way, it's going to be, basically just looking at a DFS implementation and then trying to find the shortest path for certain nodes with BFS. So, I mean, what I basically want you guys to know is that you're looking at DFS and BFS for the sprint. As long as you're aware of that, that's going to be what you need to worry about. Are you giving us the code discussed in the solution like Brady did yesterday? There's a new sprint posted. Oh, there's a new sprint posted. Is that different than the one that I was looking at? Okay, we'll give that a second to load. In the meantime, to answer your question, Michelle, I'm not sure. I wasn't officially authorized to give you guys this code, but I feel like I probably can. I'll talk to the staff and see if we can give it to you. We should be able to, but I just had to double check that. Did this load yet? Yes, this is the same thing. I mean, as far as I can tell, it says 20 commits. This has 20 commits. So yeah, I mean, same thing. But yeah, so like I said, you're basically just debugging a DFS function, which as I recall, wasn't crazy difficult, but you guys will have a look at that and then just finding the shortest path. And you're gonna have to eventually print out a path. So that should give you some thoughts about some previous things that you did this week where you had to print out paths and stuff. So Andrew, here's the bulk of it. There might be other custom class methods that I didn't include. Yeah, well, I'm sure we can understand what you did here from this 79 lines. Yeah, it's pretty good. Generate rooms less than 1. Yep. Stack IA range num rooms. If I is 0, you room dot X and room dot Y. Okay, so you made these 2 separate attributes on your room. Interesting. And as opposed to 1, like I have the list. Is coordinate available? Nice, very semantic. Self.get random direction previous. Okay, nice. Find available coordinate. Your room dot set coordinates. Okay. Coordinates 1, coordinates 2. Oh, okay, because you. So that's
so coordinates 1. The find coordinates method returns a 3-element array. The first element being the direction, the second element being the X, and the third element being the Y.
Okay, nice.
It was just something that I had to do based off of my implementation.
Okay, sounds pretty cool. New room dot X, not in self dot rooms. Okay, yeah, interesting. So yeah, sounds like the way that you did it is similar to what we did here, but of course your implementation has some different stuff to it. So very cool. Find available coordinate. Oh, okay, nice. Is coordinate available? Nice. Looks really good, Andrew. The social network thing is new. Where's that? Oh, graph social network. Oh, I see. I guess that README needs to be updated. So I didn't even notice that. But yeah, I don't really know what this is then. But, I mean, I guess you guys can take a look at it if you want. But I just kind of, briefly looked at it. I just wanted you guys to be aware of the sprint challenge. I don't want to get too deep into it because, it's for tomorrow. But let's talk about part 7, unless anybody else has any questions. A bokeh-less sprint. Yes, a very nice thing. Only thing I did different was I made a data structure for my coordinates from Tom Tarpey. You made a data structure for your coordinates. What type of data structure? Self.x, self.y. Okay, so you split out the coordinates too, Tom. Interesting. Add, subtract, multiply. That's interesting. Just in case I needed to do any vector math. Wow, vector math. Okay. Very mathematical implementation. Nice. I was going to ask you if this was 2D or 3D, Tom, but you just have X and Y, so I assume 2D. But still, I feel like with vector math, you could make this a 3D thing. Probably be some challenge to it, but it seems like that would put you on the right path. That's what you ask yourself all the time, Marshall. Decided to add it. Okay, there's 3D vector in here. Nice. Class, you never know when things might get crazy. Very, very true. North, south, east, west, up, down. Nice. Very nice. Awesome. This is fun. I can see why these people enjoy lecturing so much. Okay. Anybody else want to add anything before I get into step 7 of this project? Okay, I don't see any typing. So so step 7 is this is going to be what you're going to do today. Pretty straightforward. Randomly drop a treasure. They write a search method to find it. You had that, rooms. You generate 100 rooms in this case. You want to drop a treasure in a random room before the game starts. Then write a function for your player that uses BFS to find the shortest path on the treasure. Sounds pretty straightforward. Put a treasure in a room. A room has attributes, and I don't want to give too much away, but room has attributes, and BFS is BFS, and you need a function basically. So, it's pretty straightforward. Are there any questions for this? Nobody's typing in Slack. All right. Well, that's all I have for you guys. So, if nobody has any questions or anything else that we want to go over, then we can end early. I'll give it another 20 seconds or so, and then let it go. You're welcome, Tom. Can you give an example of what part 7 is asking? Sure. Thank you, Jacob. Can I give an example? So, yeah. So we could do that. In a nutshell, basically, it's saying if you have this room where you have a bunch of you have this this map where you have a bunch of rooms set up, then one of these things. So this is your S for your starting room, but let's say that you wanted to put the treasure here in this particular room that I have highlighted. So you have the starting room, and then you can go. You can go to rooms. You can say go east, go south, go south, go east, go south, yada 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 yada. Go east, go east, go east. I found the treasure. The treasure's in this room, and then you could stop the function at that point because you found the treasure in that room. So basically, you're just traversing through these rooms, by their connections until you get to a room which has a treasure in it. Does that make sense, Linda? What does the number 100 represent? Good question. That's just a number of rooms that you generate. So, remember in this function, generate rooms, you had self and num rooms, and this was the number of rooms that you generate because, you throw that number in this for loop here. And then for that loop, it's just repeating the pattern of take a room, add a room to it in a random direction. And then that room that you added, take that room, add a room to it in a random direction, and just repeating that pattern 100 times in that case. So, if you had it here, you did, say you did 100 rooms here, which I think this is 100. This is what the 100 represents, the number of rooms basically that you created with that generate rooms function. Will it be okay to do an A star with BFS to traverse the route? Yeah, I mean, if you can implement it, Tom, we're definitely not gonna, take off for stretching and using, a much more complicated algorithm. A star is really tough to implement. I'm not saying you can't do it. I'm sure you can, but that is a very tough algorithm. But if you want to do that, that's great. It's awesome. Marshall, I finished it early this morning. I gave each room an ID and edges. ID and edges. Interesting. So it's just like the homework, and the BFS function was basically the same function from the homework, but I added finding the treasure in the room as the conditional breaker. Interesting. Yeah. Well, I mean, that sounds like a good way to do it, Marshall. So if that works, then perfect. I guess you could start looking at the sprint challenge, but just looking over it, but don't ideally work on it until tomorrow. You're welcome, Linda. I use it a lot in my pathfinding when I make game engines and OpenGL stuff. Oh, nice. You ever use Dijkstra, Tom? I feel like that's much less efficient than A star, but I assume it has its use cases. Yeah. A lot of abstraction when building the engines. Cool. What is this? Oh yeah. Well, don't show us too much, Marshall, because this is still the project for today. So we'll go over it later in our end of the day meetings. But this looks good. Looks like you have a nice, clean implementation here. Anybody else? Going once, going twice. But I saw typing a second ago. Maybe not. All right, guys. Have a good day. I'll be around until lunchtime, and then after lunchtime, I'll be around again. The other PMs will be around, so let us know if you need anything. I will see you guys later.